Welcome to InFocus with Ejaz. This program comes to you from the Center for Security, Strategy and Policy Research. A word about CESPA. It's an autonomous policy research center housed in the University of Lahore. We tackle issues that impact contemporary security and strategic developments, and this program is part of that effort. Now, on 9th March, 2022, so we're talking about 2 years ago, at 6:43 p.m., the Air Defense Operations Center of the Pakistan Air Force picked up and began tracking a high-speed flying object that had been launched from near Sirsa, which is in India's Haryana state. And this object initially followed a trajectory inside India before it sharply changed course and maneuvered towards Pakistani territory. It violated Pakistan's airspace and ultimately fell near Mia Channu, which is a town in Pakistani Punjab's Khanewal district, and this impact happened at 6:50 p.m. Now, the Indian government kept silent for 2 days after the missile went awry. A day after the information was put out by Pakistan, India publicly confirmed that one of its missiles had been accidentally launched while undergoing, and I quote from what they said, routine maintenance, and that it crossed into Pakistan. The Indian Ministry of Defense called the incident deeply regrettable, but also expressed relief that no lives were lost. Pakistan's subsequent statement listed some 7 what they called fundamental questions, which related to the exact type of the missile that was accidentally launched, what was the missile's programmed flight path, how and why it had veered from its flight path, was the missile fitted with a self-destruct mechanism, and what technical measures and procedures, if any, does India have in place to prevent accidental missile launches during routine maintenance? The statement also castigated India for not informing Islamabad about the accidental launch and acknowledging the mishap only after Pakistan had announced the incident and sought clarification. Pakistan also demanded a joint inquiry into the accident. For its part, after a court of inquiry, and this was in August 2022, the Indian Air Force sacked 3 officers, one of whom went to the Delhi High Court against the decision. And recently, it's about a couple of months or less ago, in a reply filed before the Delhi High Court, the Indian Air Force said that combat connectors of the Brahmos missile, so we finally, the official acknowledgement of the missile type, although unofficially it was widely known that it was a Brahmos, remained connected to the junction box. And this I'm quoting from the IAF's deposition to the Delhi High Court, which led to the accidental firing of the missile. Sharing relevant findings of the Code of Inquiry, which the IAF had held in March 2022, and in August they, as I said earlier, sacked 3 officers. The IAF also told the court that the convoy commander of a road convoy, which was to move to location as part of the inspection, failed to ensure safe transit of convoy by not ensuring disconnection of combat connectors of all missiles loaded on the mobile autonomous launcher prior to the move. But there are other issues. For instance, the manner in which the president's pleasure, as we say in the subcontinent, prerogative was used to sack these officers. And even at the Delhi High Court, the IAF, the JAG branch officer, said that there were too many sensitivities involved in this, and therefore the IAF could not use the usual procedures to actually sack these officers. So too many questions still remain. And to discuss those, I have with me Dr. Debak Das, who is an assistant professor in peace and security at the Joseph Corbell School of International Studies at the University of Denver. His research lies at the intersection of international security, nuclear proliferation, crises, and international history. With him is Brigadier Feroz Hassan Khan, who's a research professor at the U.S. Naval Postgraduate School, a former brigadier in the Pakistan Army. He served as Director of Arms Control and Disarmament Affairs in the Strategic Plans Division. He is also the author of Eating Grass, The Making of the Pakistani Bomb, and Subcontinent Adrift, Strategic Futures of South Asia. Let me begin with Dr. Das here. So, Dr. Das, one thing that was acknowledged on both sides, and I was personally at one of the nuclear responsibilities conference in December last year, and the Indian participants and the Pakistani participants agreed that Pakistan showed maturity, and this could have triggered a crisis, but fortunately it did not. But I just want to get your quick view on two issues. One is the safety and security, and the second is, why do you think India acknowledged this accident only after Pakistan said that this had happened?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me on the show. So I completely agree that this was an incident which showed that Pakistan had acted extremely responsibly in terms of following the protocol of informing the general public, the international public, as well as India. India's acceptance of the accident 2 days after Pakistan made the announcement was certainly surprising, and it looked like there had been some gaps in the following of standard protocol. Why didn't India's DGMO pick up the phone and call the Pakistani side and said, "Hey, we've had an issue here. There's been an accidental firing, and it could have been more coordinated. India could have given Pakistan a heads up. There were certainly lapses in the communication side of things when it comes to this particular incident. On the safety and security side, I'm happy to go into more details of what's been going on in the court of inquiry, in the High Court, with the case now.
I would very much, of course, our viewers would love to get more information.
So I would say, look, one is this was an obvious security breach. This was an obvious case of standard operating procedures not being followed. And it's actually very remarkable that the issue of the president's prerogative was invoked, and 3 of these Air Force officers were in fact sacked from the Indian Air Force. We've not heard of these things happen in the past in the public. It's being said that it was about 23 or 25 years since the president's prerogative issue has been brought up. And even then, it wasn't done with so much of public scrutiny. So Indians too want answers as to what happened. The defense minister made a statement saying this could have led to a broader conflict with our neighbor, meaning obviously Pakistan. So there is full recognition.
This was also said in the deposition before the Delhi High Court, if I remember correctly.
Exactly. And so there's full recognition on the Indian side from the authorities, from the government, that this had a high potential for escalation, which is why you're also seeing a very sort of public action being taken in order to find some justice and some recourse. One is obviously as a way of showing Pakistan as well as other neighbors that, this is not normal practice. What happened was an aberration, and we are trying to hold the people who were responsible accountable.
Now, without prejudice to what you're saying, and then I want to go to Brigadier Khan on this. Now, you mentioned the president's prerogative, and you rightly said, and this was also said during the deposition, that one of the reasons this was invoked was because there are sensitive issues involved in this. Now, one of the implications of this argument could be, or in fairness would be, that some of this is still covered up, or is being covered up, whether, and probably wittingly, for whatever reason. So on the one hand, I accept what you're saying in terms of greater clarity about what happened. But on the other hand, there is something there, and which also incidentally, in a sort of implied manner, comes out from the very petition of the officer who invoked the court, saying that I have been wrongly sacked, and there were others who were responsible for it.
Right. I think a couple of things we need to note in terms of procedure are we're not going to have journalists, reporters, and the open public scrutinize all the details of the weapon system as well as the command and control system. These things are, subject to a number of security laws and matters of national security. So, in similar cases as well in the past, in examples of, when, say, an aircraft has crashed or something of that sort, there is a certain amount of information that the authorities come out and give us. And then there's a certain part which remains within wraps. The question is, within the bounds of ensuring national security on one hand, and keeping in mind that you need to be as transparent as possible within those bounds, the question is the right balance being struck? And
fair enough.
I think to some extent, yes, that right balance is being struck. The wing commander who's taking the government now to court has actually, that case has brought out a lot more details, and the government is slowly but surely declassifying certain things to the extent that they potentially can, which I think is a welcome step.
Right. I'm going to circle back to you on that. But let me pull in Brigadier Khan on this. Brigadier Khan, so you've been part of, you actually the first director actor. And before that, you were part of the analysis wing also. And so you've seen all of this in terms both of the evolution of the nuclear capability, weapons capability, and the delivery systems, including the missiles, and of course, the strategy that surrounds the entire thing on the Pakistani side. What do you make of this accident, and what do you make of what the Indian government has done since?
Yes. Well, thank you very much, Ejaz, for inviting me, and Debak, good to hear from you. Really, sometimes one has to figure out why are we talking this 2 years after the incident has happened. One is that because of the inquiry that's going on in the court. I believe that's why this is important. Otherwise, this issue was long dead and buried. And we have already talked about, that India and Pakistanis are assumed to be responsible countries when we go back to the days when we were growing up into the Pakistani hidden days of nuclear arsenals. We were saying, these countries don't deserve to have nuclear weapons, but that they're going to get into this crisis. That's a common theory. I live in the West here. I'm speaking from here, and the constant thing, So one thing that came out is that the way India and Pakistan handled this particular crisis, or for that matter, even the 2019 crisis, is not as terrible as it looks like to the Western world, that everything can go completely wrong. But when we go by the other kind of logics, that is that logic on which we grew. Now, Ejaz, you and I have talked a lot in the past about normal accident theory. Remember, we talked about Charles Perrow. We used to talk about Scott Sagan's limits of safety, and talked about the normal accident theory and the high reliability theory. We grew up as arms control understanding of these issues. We all understand that this is a classic case of what happens. Those theories. We only knew from the 3 Mile Island incident that had happened. But what did happen is the problem is not as clear. I mean, I agree with everything Deposi has said, except for the right thing that you are mentioning something that you believe that the right balance is struck. Now, I may want you to qualify that, whether the right balance is struck. Now, I fully understand, given my former position and what you just mentioned, that when an incident of such a nature happens in a classified program of such a nature, which is a dual use capability, the establishing fact is the most important thing, especially with your neighbor. We heard that this was probably an exercise 2 years back. And now we are hearing that this was going for an inspection. Now, these are two different things. From whatever I understand, the protocols is important for both India and Pakistan to actually know each other, because we don't know what really happened. Because that does not give enough confidence in my assessment in Pakistan, because If the statement of the officer is that this was a live weapon going, a live weapon cannot fire in a tightly coupled situation like this. It was clearly not going for an inspection, it was going for some other purpose. That creates doubts in Pakistan. So the right balance is that India must clarify sufficient doubt in Pakistan that this was neither intended, which I believe that was the case. It was an accident that happened. And to the extent to create the right balance is to make the people confident, particularly on this thing, what happened. We can talk about
I just want to, Brigadier Khan, you raising a very significant point, and of course, I would like to take this to Dr. Das. I can see that he's jotting this down. But when this happened, a couple of days, and I'm sure Dr. Das has also monitored this, there was some reports in the Indian press which indicated that this missile was originally going to hit a target in the Mahajan firing ranges.
correct,
Which is why it's, if you look at the trajectory, it first flies in the general direction of, according to the Indian media and analysts, in the direction of the Mahajan firing ranges. And then at some point, it sharply takes almost like a dog leg, and then starts traveling towards and into the Pakistani airspace. So you're absolutely right. I just wanted to flag this
yeah.
for furthering the discussion also, and for Dr. Das also to perhaps weigh in on this. Ji, Brigadier Khan, go ahead.
Yes, I was. Let me finish my thought.
Yeah,
I'm
I
surely
just wanted to flag this point.
surely. So the whole fundamental point was that the doubt in Pakistan that was created and still is, whether the debate is whether this was a deliberate action or was it purely an inadvertence. Meaning, inadvertence can happen in two ways. It can be an accidental of a human error, or it could be a technical glitch. We all know, or a combination of both. So these are some of the broader things that needs to be done. My major point is different from that point. Whatever has happened has happened. It can happen to anybody, and I do believe that the more technologically dependent we become, the more likelihood we are going to get into the normal accidental chances, because systems are tightly coupled, and the situation is becoming more and more complex when computer systems are involved. So these glitches will happen. We know that this is part of the broader inadvertence. But what have Indian and Pakistani done for the last 25 years? This was exactly, may I say one word, Ejaz, because this is an important point. India and Pakistan had pledged themselves to carry out an assessment of all these kind of practices, because we are geographically tight coupled, not just in terms of, the Lahore Memorandum of Understanding, which I was part of the organization at the time, precisely predicted these kind of things that India and Pakistan would be talking. We talked across each other. We don't talk at all on these issues at all. And one last point that I would say, because I want to hear more, you mentioned about the DGMO hotlines, in your remark. May I say something on that? DGMO hotlines are structured hotlines on a weekly basis now. These hotlines, in my assessment, is not a crisis prevention or even, crisis escalation control thing, because DGMOs are not sitting on their chair all the time. I can give you one example, which is my personal example. I'm sitting with the DGMO when that infamous hijacking from, Kathmandu happened. It landed in Amritsar. And the whole idea of DGMO discussion was to prevent that aircraft that eventually landed in Kandahar not to land in Lahore. No DGMO, not a duty officer from India was picking up the telephone. I was in GHQ at the time, right there when this was happening. So by the time the DGMOs came, by the time the Indian ambassador and all came, that's just giving one crisis. We do not have good mechanism to prevent a crisis of this sort. It can happen. The last agreement was in 2007. And, there is no agreement about cruise missiles, flight launches. There is no agreement beyond what was done in the early parts of the nuclear age. This is not a right balance between India and Pakistan. And I think India needs to clarify more of its neighbor a little bit more. I understand that you have to balance what can go in public, what is classified. But I think this is a main point that I wanted to bring about, and we can talk more about if you want. Yeah.
Okay, now, Dr. Das, you've got a plethora of issues on the table, and I can see you've been jotting them down. So
Yeah.
quickly, because we have about 10, 12 minutes left for this. So let's hear you out of this.
Thank you so much, Brigadier Khan. These are very important issues, of course, that you've raised. Let me tackle a few of them. One is on the issue of crisis prevention and the DGMO hotline and the lack of actually having a system at all. And then there's a question of a system that works. We definitely need to be doing more work on that. You're right, technology has progressed. We've got cruise missiles, a lot of cruise missiles on both sides now. These sort of accidents, as you rightly pointed out, are expected in terms of normal accidents theory. You keep a technical system that is of a sophisticated nature for long enough, something or the other might go wrong, and we should have fail-safes in order to ensure that either side does not, sort of get sparked off by an accident. That said, I think that's an important point, and we need to be doing more work in our track twos as well as in our official track diplomacy about that. In terms of, was it an exercise or was it an inspection? I'm thinking about it in terms of, does that necessarily help us create a certain amount of stability? And I think whether it's an exercise or whether it's an inspection is not necessarily the key question here. The key question is, why couldn't the Indian side notify the Pakistani side, give them advance warning that something had gone awry? Why it had gone awry is a second level of question. I think the thing to focus on here is the lack of communications. And on that note, I think India definitely needs to be doing way better on that particular score.
If I may, quick interjection.
Absolutely.
Now, you have a point that, the two levels here. But I would humbly suggest that the distinction between a routine maintenance and an exercise is also an important issue, in that I am assuming, commonsensically, even if one does not know the official SOPs and the drills, that the SOPs for the handling of that platform or that weapon system in those two situations will be distinctly different. And, if it is an exercise, and if the weapon has been accidentally launched, one of the questions that Pakistan had said, most of these cruise missiles in that situation will be pre-programmed in terms of their target acquisition. Did something go wrong? Is there a self-destruct mechanism? The point that you're making with reference to communication is, of course, vital, but that comes after the incident, or in this case, accident, has happened. So I just wanted to flag this point, but go ahead.
I think that's an important point. Is there a self-destruct option? We don't know, right?
No, there's not.
And if there was, presumably that should have been used, right? So as Brigadier Khan is saying, there is none, and that's what the evidence seems to indicate, right?
Yeah.
I think, again, back to that distinction. To me, that distinction, whether it's an exercise or an inspection, is not key, because what is key is you could have an accident in either. The question is, can you deal with an accident?
My point is that the reasons would be different.
Right. The reasons might be different. And you're right that we don't know the full extent of the minute-by-minute, play-by-play of what exactly went wrong. That still has not come out. And I'm not sure that's going to come out before a long time because of declassification processes and things like that. I think what is key is whether you have mechanisms to deal with accidents of these sort of very sensitive and high-stakes nature. Whether it's an exercise or an inspection, an accident is an accident and you're responsible for it. And you should be able to deal with that in a way that is destabilizing, not creating a shroud of mystery. And
Correct.
on that particular note, I think that's the key thing to take away from this.
Right.
Okay.
Ejaz, can I step in for a second?
Yes, yes, please do. But I also have a question for you, and I would also want Dr. Das to focus on that question. But go ahead. Let me first
No,
hear you out.
I think you make a very point. This is not about whether I'm good and you bad, or this accidents can happen. The reason I'm making some mention here is that the facts are important to be ascertained to a certain extent. Again, I'm coming to that point. Now, you mentioned, Ejaz, in your very opening remark that this started from Sirsa.
Yes.
Now, do you know that this is not what India says? India says this thing happened in Ambala. We're not even clear about the location where it happened. All studies that are done about, and India is admitting where it happened, the two different locations where it emanated from, they are not just simply the flight path. The total flight path is roughly about 7 minutes and something equally divided between two. Nothing can be done in that short time. Even India would have not known what has happened to the missile in 7 years' time, much less talk to the Pakistanis. And that's why we've been writing about why do we need to have the nuclear risk reduction systems in both countries, almost like 24/7 system, so that you can immediately communicate with each other. Immediately. Now, there are certain elements, if there are exercises happening where you are using dual capable systems, obviously you're not going to have live warheads or explosive warheads on them. But we have had this history, so you will not do that. I'll give you an example on Pakistani side.
Last year, I'm sure Dr. Das knows about this. Last year, during an exercise, an Indian Army exercise, and there was a court of inquiry. I don't know what happened to that court of inquiry. There were 3 missiles that just went awry. I mean, luckily they didn't get into the Pakistani space, but they just got accidentally launched.
Yeah, no, Ejaz, I was making a point that it can
I have no
happen.
idea what those missiles were, but all I'm saying is that there have been other such incidents also. Now, my point really is, and I want to focus this because you rightly pointed to I was reminded of reading Perot's work like God knows a century ago. But here's the thing. One other thing that we need to know, and I think this is very important, and I hope that Dr. Das will also agree with me, that there are 2 levels here. One is the question whether what happened is purely a human error, or whether what happened is a combination of the human error and a system error.
Yes.
And the reason I say that whether it's a system error is because immediately after this, there were questions by the Philippines government with reference to Brahmos. And because is it possible for the system to go off track, like follow a trajectory and then go somewhere else? Because that's then a system problem. Even if it has been accidentally launched, which is of course at the level of the human error. So I would want Brigadier Khan for you to sort of give me a sense of that, and also for Dr. Das to focus on this.
Right. So, I mean, you brought Philippines. I had a Philippine student right now in my class, and then, at the time an incident happened, I also had one, and they were asking a question that they were asking my opinion about whether Philippines should go ahead and buy the Brahmos. And I said, look, I mean, the accidents can happen anytime because, we just don't know what happened. It's just the point is that there has to be a system that has to prevent in the future. We can keep on beating up on the past. I was talking about that it can happen either side. It can happen on either side. For example, you and I know that every year the Pakistani Army War College does a major exercise in the end that ends up in a flight test, as part of an exercise. Now, do we have a mechanism with India and Pakistan? It can go wrong. There has been cases inside Pakistan where a Gauri missile was launched and a test flight was launched. India must be notified at the time because of agreement, but it disintegrated midway. We had an Arihant incident in India. It's just not about pointing you're good or I'm bad, but it can happen.
No. Nobody look.
It's a very important thing for us.
That's not, at least that's not my intention. But I am definitely greatly interested, not just because of my background in this, but also because these are issues precisely because of the possibility as well as the probability
Right. Yes.
of such accidents for the two countries. And let me also flag another point, which is that India now has, by our reckoning, it has certain categories of ballistic missiles which are canistrized. So we
Yes.
assume that they are mated, and therefore it becomes even more, a matter of grave concern for us, as it would be for the Indians if the shoe were on the other foot, that something like this, because there is no known technology which can tell a country that the incoming missile, and we're talking about a nuclear dyad, that an
Right.
incoming missile, whether it has a strategic warhead or it has a tactical warhead, so you can either fail deadly or you can fail impotent. So I think that it's a really, as far as I'm concerned, a very serious matter here.
It is a serious matter. Just the reason you bringing the technology, I'm glad you brought, because I was about to bring about the canisterized systems, and the other part is the sea base system now. When you
Correct.
say that your sea base is a deterrent patrol, and we don't know the Pakistanis do send it or not. We know that India has a nuclear power submarine, and the Pakistanis don't. Are they really carrying out nuclear weapons on board when you say it's a deterrent patrol, or it's just an announcement? Do you have the
Correct.
confidence with your adversary? And going forward, the technology is not going analog; it's going more and more digitized. It's going to go more. We're getting into UAVs. We're going into other forms of technologies. Now, if all kinds of drones, etc., of modern kinds are flying over going forward, we see what's going on in the Middle East. We see what's going on in Ukraine. If this is happening in this part, we are going to be shooting down each other and getting into inadvertent wars in the future if we do not go by the agreement that Mr. Vajpayee and Mr. Sharif did in 1998 and going forward. It's critically for the civilization of subcontinent that we are talking here, not just about, And so my opinion is, whenever there's an exercise going on, whenever something is going on, India, Pakistan need to have live officers sitting either in Foreign Office or in DGM office to be in communication, just in case something goes wrong or right wrong, especially if systems are being used for any other purposes. We are lucky.
Right.
And more importantly, India, Pakistan need to have an agreement of a non-alert agreement of each other in peacetime, because luckily this did not have a live warhead of a sense, that it's a projectile of sort. But if we have a formal agreement, things can go wrong. At least it will not escalate to the level that we fear. So that these are the things going forward, what to do.
Right. A few minutes left. So as we say in Urdu, Shama is in front of Dr. Das. And so I'm sure you would want to respond to some of what we've discussed earlier. But one other point, India has consistently refused to bring in the cruise missiles category in terms of flight pre-notification. And so I would like for you to give us a sense of why. And secondly, we have seen, and this is something, and I'm basing this on analyses coming out of India, not recently, but over a period of time, in terms of handling of systems and platforms. For instance, there was a major accident which rendered the Indian SSBN non-operational for almost a year. So because we have established that these things can happen, we need to sort of have some, despite other aspects of the relationship, like something like, for instance, at one point, as during the height of the Cold War, before Detan, Pugwash had become one of those forums where Americans and the Soviets would whisper into each other's ears and say things that they could not publicly say. Now, I'm not saying that we start using Pugwash for that, but I'm saying that we need to have, despite other irritants, we need to have on these issues, we need to have some kind of mechanism in and through which, even if the Indian government cannot make certain things public domestically, that it needs to assure and reassure the Pakistani side that this is what happened and we're taking care of this.
Right. So lots of different issues have been raised. Let me try and address at least some of those. One is, I think, when we're talking about clear signaling, for example, I think we are not just talking about clear signaling during crisis. I think there has to be clear signaling before that. And to that extent, I think that, India has very clearly said Brahmos is a conventional system. We've not incorporated it in our nuclear and strategic forces. I think those are good signs, and more of that should be done with future systems, ballistic missiles, etc. Right? So that at the very outset can let everybody know, including Pakistan, that this is not for strategic use. On that score, I think India has done well and has made a few things at least clear. On the issue of the SSBN, I think we are talking about different categories of kinds of accidents, right? Because the SSBN issue is that there was a hatch which was left open. Now, how that hatch was left open and why that hatch was left open are serious issues that India has to deal with. But from a point of view of India's neighbors, that was not necessarily a threat to anybody, right? Apart from the Indian Navy itself, and its deterrence patrol.
My point was that the SOP for not opening the hatch is like a very simple thing, and so sort of extrapolating from there and then going into more complex systems is what is really the point that I'm trying to make.
Absolutely. And, I agree with Brigadier Khan when he says, the more complex systems will get, the more likelihood of these kinds of accidents, not just from India, but from other countries, including Pakistan, right? And so we do need to have a cruise missile pre-notification sort of agreement. For both sides, I think it's going to make for better crisis stability. Why both sides decided not to go ahead with that is, in some ways baffling to me. But I think that's the way forward. I think at this stage of the show, maybe let's talk about things going forward in terms of solutions, right? And I think what you're saying in terms of, there was a pugwash mechanism at some point where people could talk to each other. I think we're at a stage in our relationship where India is now hyper-focused on China, right? Yeah. So in some ways, there is an expectation that, India, Pakistan, we've come through we matured into a sort of stability between two sides. And we've kind of left it on one side and moved towards trying to figure out another issue with another adversary. I think that's where there needs to be some form of reorientation and make sure that, let's not just assume that we've reached a certain stability and let's leave things on one side. Let's try and ensure that as technology advances, we are keeping up with that on the human side, as well as on the government to government and track 2 side, to ensure that crises like these don't happen. Because as this discussion clearly shows, these are extremely high stakes crises.
Absolutely. Any final thoughts, Brigadier Khan, before
I just want to say on the point that you made about the technology, advancing and accidents likely to happen. We have the opposite theory again. We didn't talk about the high reliability theory as well. That has also been the case, that organizations and their systematic improvement with sensitivities, understanding leadership and tight. Now, like we used to have aircraft accidents a lot. Today we can sit on the plane, and because this is all high reliability, very recently we have 737 Boeing issues, if you remember. What happened? We all were grounded. How many people were sacked in the process? The Air Force entire leadership in America was sacked at the time when the incident happened. So you can create sort of a SOPs and create organizational system to prevent from happening and be giving confidence to the people. It is not that while it will happen because you are getting there, we can prevent that from happening. So I don't want to end a note on a dismal note by saying this, but it can happen. But mostly the accidental theory says that it is usually 80 to 88% is a human fault that usually does that, and technical glitches because of unsafe actions, And still there is an act of God that will still remain, So
But that said, high reliability oftentimes leads us into a sense of complacency. I
Yeah.
mean, Ejaz sahab brought up the issue of the Cold War. We had so many accidents during the Cold War. The
Correct.
case of Stanislav Petrov looking
Yeah.
at the incoming ballistic missiles on his radar systems and saying, this doesn't look right, even though the technical
Yeah.
systems seem to be telling us this. We've got so many different examples of just luck during crises, and there's now a literature on luck, following the literature on nuclear
No,
accidents.
absolutely. I mean, I completely believe when Lawrence Friedman wrote, years ago, when we were discussing the two schools of thought, you've got Schelling here and you've got Khan there and the rest of it. And he said, well, at the end of the day, if we did not have a nuclear exchange, it was because of pure luck. And frankly, I was just having this discussion yesterday with an economist, and I was saying, look, we can game theorize all we can do, but at the end of the day, we also say that deterrence is there, but the fact is that it's there until it breaks down, and and then if you have the doomsday weapons, and if it breaks down, then you are in a lot of trouble. And we know from so much literature on the Cuban Missile Crisis. But it was such a pleasure having you on the panel, Dr. Das, Brigadier Khan. I'm really grateful to both of you for your insights. This is all from this episode. If you like the discussion, click on the subscribe button. This helps us bring you quality discussions. Until our next episode, goodbye and stay safe.